FLAGSTAFF Arizona, a first-of-its-kind federal study of Native American boarding schools that for over a century sought to assimilate Indigenous children into white society, has identified more than 400 such schools that were supported by the U.S. government and more than 50 associated burial sites. The report released Wednesday by the Interior Department expands the number of schools that were known to have operated for 150 years, starting in the early 19th century and coinciding with the removal of many tribes from their ancestral lands. The dark history of the boarding schools, where children who were taken from their families were prohibited from speaking their Native American languages and often abused, has been felt deeply across Indian country and through generations. Many children never returned home. The investigation has so far turned up over 500 deaths at 19 schools, though the Interior Department said that number could climb to the thousands or even tens of thousands. Many of those children were buried in unmarked or poorly maintained burial sites far from their Indian tribes, Alaska Native. A second volume of the report will cover the burial sites as well as the federal government's financial investment in the schools and the impacts of the boarding schools on Indigenous communities, the Interior Department said. The consequences of federal Indian boarding school policies, including T. Haaland, who as Laguna, announced an initiative last June to investigate the troubled legacy of boarding schools and uncover the truth about the government's role in them. The 408 schools her agency identified operated in 37 states or territories, many of them in Oklahoma, Arizona, and New Mexico. The Interior Department acknowledged the number of schools identified could change as more data is gathered. The coronavirus pandemic and budget restrictions hindered some of the research over the last year, said Bryan Newland, the Interior Department's Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. The department has so far found at least 53 burial sites at or near the U.S. boarding schools, both marked and unmarked. The U.S. government directly ran some of the boarding schools. Catholic, Protestant and other churches operated others with federal funding, backed by U.S. laws and policies to civilize Native Americans. The Interior Department report was prompted by the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves at former residential school sites in Canada that brought back painful memories for Indigenous communities.